We have a very special guest joining us here on the podcast from the Whiskey Dictionary, Bill the Whiskey Dic Eburn. Hello, sir.
Hey guys, I'll never get tired of that nickname.
Where did that nickname come from, Bill the Whiskey Dic?
Did
that come from the name of your YouTube channel, or did that come before the channel?
So I've definitely got some great stories about the origin of the channel, but I got to say, unfortunately, the naming of the channel is probably one of the more anticlimactic ones. However, so what happened was I decided I wanted to start this channel, and I sat down at my counter and I said, what am I going to call this thing? And I started thinking, I'm like, okay, it's going to be about information, whatever, like, so like a dictionary or like an encyclopedia. And then like, as soon as I said the word dictionary, I was like, Whiskey Dic is a thing. And so, and that, like, there was just no other choice that would have ever made sense.
Nice. Nice. Well, some quick background about Bill. He's a man of many tastes. He's a DM of all things whiskey. He is also the dungeon master on his other YouTube channel, which is called Dungeons and Drams, and we'll talk about that a little later on in this episode. But you can find Bill on YouTube. His channel is The Whiskey Dictionary. Straight and to the point.
Nice.
Well, thank you.
Podcast's over. Good. I got the plug in there.
Yeah, we did it. Well,
it really is like a great pun, though. I gotta say, Bill, like it is it's like one of those ultimate dad puns that just compounds on itself and just becomes funny just because it's just you can't challenge it.
I think it must have come around organically because my first child was 6 months old when I came up with the name. And I think it was just me flexing those dad muscles, the dad joke muscles. So
nice. So let's just jump right into it. So Bill, why don't you give us some background on the Whiskey Dictionary? And I guess first and foremost, when did you start your channel?
Sure. So technically the channel started in 2014, but I didn't put out the first episode till March of 2015. So I consider that the birthday. So I've been doing it a little over 8 years. Hundreds and hundreds of episodes. Anybody who happens to be watching on YouTube, which you totally should, by the way, you'll see there's about 264, but who's counting, bottles behind me, and all different variety from scotches, ryes, American malts, bourbons, of course, Japanese, Canadian. I could go on, and I probably will. But the channel has been part of my life for quite a few years, actually, for most of the time that I've known Zach.
How long have you known Zach for?
Oh boy, what, you started in 2013 as well?
Yes, it was like March 2013. Yeah.
So Zach and I used to work at the same company. I'm still there. Zach has moved on at this point. He found something much better, I'm sure. But him and I got to know each other a long time ago. And then maybe a few weeks ago, Zach messaged me out of the middle of nowhere, and he's just like, "Hey, that whiskey thing you do, you want to be on our podcast?" I'm like, absolutely. I love to hear myself talk.
Well, thank you, Zach. Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pleasure. And especially, for the listeners, my whole thing is I like just giving people a platform that are interesting and you should know anyways. And like, why don't you know the Whiskey Dictionary? You should know the Whiskey Dictionary if you like whiskey. And seriously, Bill is just like a really great and knowledgeable person in general. So, yeah.
Well, thanks, Zach. Appreciate that. Wish I could say the same. But
oh, Bill, yes, every single day coming into work, it was that, and you had the whole IT team rolling every single time. I will say though, I rely on. It literally was Seinfeld. Every single day when I came in.
In a lot of ways.
I will say though, I rely on all of that like time and like experience and like every single job I had after that. Like I still utilize all of that because it is really important being able to break down things to regular people from IT standpoints sometimes.
Well, I appreciate that, Zach. And actually, I think that you were. We're going to stop having our little love session here in a sec, but I think that you were misused, honestly, at our company. I think that I'm glad you took something good away from it, and I think that you'll probably be better off, where you are. So, cool.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Zach, we'll have to, obviously we're not going to give any detail away about it, but I know you started a new gig recently and you already seem much happier with it, especially from a sleeping standpoint.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, especially the sleeping standpoint. I guess with the exception of last night. But all I'll say is On the Border, I will never eat at any of your locations ever again. Ever. Ever. I don't care what state you're in, just like you've lost me as a customer for good. Because wow, I had an awful night last night. Ugh.
Well, on that note, let me tell you about On the Border with several locations. And
where did you find it On the Border near here?
So remember, I'm in Connecticut now.
Yeah, even still though, I didn't realize they were this close.
Yeah, there's one in Rocky Hill apparently.
Okay.
I just can't recommend going there myself. But yeah, I am a lot happier, especially considering that I was literally I feel like I went back in time because for the listeners, first job that I really had was I was a UPS package handler. And then that's when I discovered that I have a little worker bee in me because in order to get through that job, I had to literally force myself just to keep going and not pay attention to anything. And then eventually that killed me. And then I found a seasonal job at Bose. And that was the only experience that got me into the job that, me and Bill used to work at. Well, Bill still works at, but, I used to work at. That in a nutshell. I'm a lot happier that I'm not sifting through, soiled garments and literally barreling up print rags. That was what I was doing for the last 2 and a couple of months, which is still an upgrade from climbing up on telephone poles and installing cable during the later months of lockdown. That was fun.
Oh, Jesus.
Man, you've been busy.
Yes, no, I feel like I've had a complete lifetime movie life montage within the last couple of years.
What's funny to me, and I forget who I was talking to on this podcast about. I was talking with our voice guy, Adam. We're talking about, because he made some comment. We were talking about someone that we know, and he was like, yeah, he was a couple of grades above us. And I'm like, I love how we're all in our 30s and we still refer to things as by school years. And just Zach saying all of these things, and just in the back of my mind, I'm like, Zach, come on, dude, you're in the 9th grade. What are you talking about? And I'm like, no, you're not anymore.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't point out. So I just turned 40 a couple of weekends ago. And I was able to achieve, this has nothing to do with whiskey, kind of, but I was able to achieve a lifelong dream of my own. So when I was in 6th grade, not that either one of you asked, but when I was in 6th grade, I had decided to myself that the height of frivolity, the height of just prove to myself that I had made it, would be to fly to Philadelphia, get a cheesesteak, and fly home in the same day.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Lifetime achievement award, though.
Right? It's so stupid, but in 6th grade, to me, I was like, yeah, that's what rich people do. So I told my wife about this probably 10 years ago. And she said to me, maybe January of this year, she's like, hey, for your 40th birthday, do you want to do anything? Because I have an idea. And I was like, well, what's your idea? Why don't we do that thing where you go to Philadelphia and you invite a whole bunch of people or whatever? So we kind of looked at the logistics, and long story short, it was just her and me. But which was fine because we have 2 little kids, and we were able to kind of give them to my parents for a few days or a couple of days. And what we did is we woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. We got to the airport. We got on a flight for 6:34, and we flew to Philadelphia. And we did a couple of the Philadelphia things. We saw the Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, and we did the Rocky Steps, of course. And then we had a very important decision to make, which was where to go for the cheesesteak. Now, I am anybody again watching on YouTube can see I'm not like a man of slender frame here. So I'm not averse to multiple cheesesteaks. So especially if you can prep for that a couple days ahead of time. So my wife, she is actually quite skinny, so I'm surprised that she kept up with me. But we went to the general tourist traps, Geno's and Tom's, I think I want to say, or something like that. And we went to both of those places. We both got half of a cheesesteak to ourselves. We kind of split them and shared them. And they were like, right? They were the tourist traps, but it makes sense. But there's a place called D'Alessandro's, and anybody listening, this is where you want to go. Way, way better, significantly better. And it's a little bit out of the way, but we ended up going there. And then it was amazing. It was fantastic. We ended up back at a beer garden closer to the airport and headed home that night. And we ended up actually spending a night in a hotel back here in Massachusetts because my parents had offered to keep the kids overnight. So nice. It was an awesome day. It was ridiculous, and it was super fun.
Nice. Well, first and foremost,
expensive cheesesteak I'll ever have.
First and foremost, happy birthday. And
thank you.
And second, if we go back to the beginning of the story, I was half expecting you to say that you did this entire excursion by yourself, and then when you got home, your wife is like, "Where have you been? I've been calling you." I'm like, "Oh, I was in Philadelphia. We went and got a cheesesteak."
that actually would have been just as good, I think.
Let me redirect back to your wall of whiskey, if I may.
Oh, yeah.
12 minutes into this, throw out the first Simpsons reference of the episode. Is any of that painted onto the wall?
No, that's a load-bearing whiskey.
Is your source on this reliable?
Floor is a little gritty, but no.
That's it, Zach. You don't need to be here anymore. You're good.
See, I knew you'd like Bill.
I could definitely early Simpsons. Yeah, man, I'm quoting it all day long.
Hell yeah, hell yeah.
And I have actually had. It's funny because when I take client calls and stuff, which doesn't happen a lot, but so I don't mind telling you guys. But so my professional career, my job title is director of development. So in general, I'm in charge of people, whatever, we get things done. But if there's like a real big problem with a real big client, sometimes they'll call me in as like the heavy hitter, right? And let me tell you, nothing what you would have called like diffuses a tense situation than turning on my camera. Because immediately you've got a lot of people who are just like, "Oh, what do you got back there? What's that? Oh, I know that one." Like they just love looking at what's on the wall.
Nice.
There's a lot of bottles behind me.
Now, do you have any of those filled with like water or like juice or anything, or is it all just pure alcohol?
Well, none of it's pure alcohol. In fact, a lot of it is water, but that's only because they're 40% to 100%, or 50%, whatever.
Mr. Technical over here. What?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, boy, that joke flopped. I'm gonna just accept that one. So,
what do you got?
There you go.
What do you got? A YouTube channel about whiskey?
I was like, I bet he has a sound effect he's gonna play for me.
That alone should be a sound drop right there.
One of my favorite things. I imagine that you guys at some point have listened to Opie and Anthony back in the day.
Oh my God, that's why we started this. Yeah,
yeah, that's part of the history of the show. I've probably
listened to, I want to say easily 80 to 90% of their shows, even when they were doing it back on like WBCN and WAAF, et cetera, et cetera. One of my favorite bits that they ever did was when it was like all the time when either Anthony or usually Opie would tell a joke and it would just flop, and Jimmy would just chime in immediately, be like, what was that? Like he didn't hear, and they would repeat it and he'd be like, "I heard you."
Oh my God. I do that to people all the time and they get so mad at me.
It would make me laugh so hard every single time.
Every fucking time I do that to someone. And I will set them up and I'll very politely, I'll do exactly how Jimmy does it. I'll very politely, "Hey, what was that?" And they start to repeat and I just go, "I heard you." And there's just silence when that happens. It's just,
if I ever heard somebody else do that in person, I would lose it. I would be like on the ground rolling.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to contain it either.
There was one day at my old gig where someone that I never like talked to before, someone I see all the time, but never talked to before. I just overheard him. He's just talking about something, and then I just hear him go, linger longer. And I just looked at him and I just go, waddle-doodle. And we just, for like the next 5 minutes, we're just dueling greasemen. I'm like, I have found one of my people. Oh man.
I was gonna say we could just turn this into the Talk About Opie and Anthony podcast at this point. I was like,
well, the whole reason I wanted to work in radio, I worked at WAF, by the way, for 4 years.
Okay.
And I gotta tell you, the 100 grand bit, totally fake. And the quote unquote winner was some guy that used to work on the sales team who is known for like he would always someone would tell him something and he'd always go, what? And that's like what he does when they tell you you want a candy bar, bro. And then when he does that in the bit, that's the whole thing was staged. Even
I'm not surprised.
Even back then, you would never be able to get away with something like that. You'd get sued out the ass because people had tried to imitate it and got sued and were like, oh wait, the bit wasn't, it was just a bit. Well, boy, our faces are red. But one of my favorite things, just in general, anytime someone would tell a joke and it bombed.
Yeah, the car crash.
Oh, nothing would make me happier than just hearing that. And if ever I'm in a bad mood too, I just put on the 9 hour Steve from Yellowstone compilation. That's up there on YouTube. Yes. Oh, that just cheers me up. That takes me out of a funk.
Or the Jimmy Dean sausage.
Sausage.
I bought your sausages.
And for my family, like 4 girls, my wife, who's a little plump. Zach, are you still here?
I was gonna say, should we just keep quoting O&A back to
I guess we're swapping roles here because I was gonna say just to bring it back to the topic.
Well, I did want to talk about the stuff I do.
I seriously, I wanted to tell him that when I went to a taping of the Late Late Show with James Corden in 2021, it was I know that dude gets a lot of shit, but that was really fun. It was a really good time. And he actually say what you want. I'm taking it as he was being like a genuinely nice guy because he actually was like talking to everyone in the crowd, would do like a Q&A and like wanted to make sure anyone that had a question, even if it was something as dumb as like, how are babies made? He would answer it. And they put me, if you ever saw his set, it had a bar on it in the set and they put me there. And I was like the quote unquote bartender for the episode, which meant absolutely nothing. The camera didn't even pan over that far. So you never saw me on TV, but just like what you got behind you, a wall of liquor, except it was all filled with water or like Gatorade. And because like they can't, for some reason legally, they can crack open any bottle on those shelves, but it can't actually be filled with liquor. So if they ever
that makes sense.
Feel like, oh, we're
Plus
taking
it'd be
shots.
wicked expensive.
Yeah, that too. So, but I do like that it's all 100% authentic as it should be.
Absolutely. And there's some stuff back there. Actually, can't quite see it, but there's things back there that are super unique. Actually, I've got another bit over there. I'm not going to turn the camera because it'll get all out of focus, but I have a whole nother set of shelves over there. With actually that shelf only has probably about 40 bottles on it, which sounds like an immense amount, but considering what's behind me, it's like a drop in the bucket.
Nice.
Yeah, but there's some cool stuff on this shelf. So let me ask you guys this: what do you have as far like let's do some whiskey dictionary stuff. Like, what questions about whiskey do you guys have? Is there anything you want to know? Because I'm a wealth of knowledge, mostly from just drinking and reading. So.
Zach, I'll throw it over to you because I don't want to steamroll you.
I mean, I was just kind of thinking, like, what kind of made it such a staple?
I actually have a great answer for this. So there's a couple of major events in the history of whiskey that have made it so prevalent, especially in the U.S. But we'll talk about Scotch too. So number one, Prohibition, of course. It's the forbidden fruit. Like when Prohibition happened, rye was kind of the big deal here in the US. And it was Canadian rye, actually, which was funny because most of the whiskey was coming from Canada. It was coming over in boats across, what is that? I'm forgetting the name of the river, but basically up north, they would bring it over across the river and people would come pick it up in trucks and drive it all over the place. And that was a big thing. So once Prohibition ended, we're talking the 20s, everybody wanted whiskey. So that was one of the big things. But the more recent thing, the thing that has really put it in the zeitgeist of current day is, in my opinion, craft beer. So whiskey and beer are made extremely similar. There's just a lot more steps to make whiskey and a lot more time, of course. But when you consider the fact that craft beer, actually, Zach and I were both drinking a beer before we even hit record here. Craft beers are huge, right? So if you just tack on 4 years, you've got craft American whiskeys. And there's a lot of different types. So this is a question a lot of people have is, they say, what's the difference between whiskey and bourbon or whiskey and Scotch? Or the short answer is whiskey is a superset of all types of those more defined things like Scotch, bourbon, American single malt, rye. I could go on. But what you should think about is right now, the US is like the Wild West again with American whiskeys. And there's a type of whiskey called American single malts that has very little in the way of legislature to determine exactly what needs to be in that barrel when you're aging it. And because of that, people are able to go crazy. So if you have a bourbon, there are very definitive rules as to what makes a bourbon. And that's boring, so I won't go into it. But mostly it's new oak and a certain ABV, and you can't fiddle with it, right? So with American single malt, you can do some weird stuff. You can make it from oat. You can make it from rice. You can make it from barley. And a lot of them do make it from barley, which is the way that Scotch is made too. So to answer your question, I think that the craft beer boom directly had an influence on craft whiskeys. And because of that, people are all about it.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Good
I mean,
question,
I
though.
guess
Heavy-hitting
that's a
question
good,
right off the bat.
oh yeah, I'm good with that. So that's a good segue too, because so then the next thing for me is, why Whiskey Dictionary for you? Like, what was it that made it something that you wanted to bring to people?
A much less cerebral answer here. So I actually love telling this story. So when my wife and I first started dating, we're talking 2010, 2011, I think, something like that. I think it's 2010. We had, we'd been dating for a little while, and she wanted to introduce me to some of her friends. And she brought me over to this guy, Pat, and his wife, Dee Dee's house. And Pat is a guy from Kentucky, and he's got the Southern accent, all this stuff. And he's just like, I'm not going to try to do the accent. Despite the D&D thing, Southern accents just come out sounding insulting. So he goes, Bill, have you ever had whiskey? And I'm like, well, yeah, I've had like a bottle of Johnny Walker Black. I've had some Chivas Regal, whatever. He's like, no, Jack Daniels. He's like, no, like real whiskey. And so I'm like, well, tell me more about what you're talking about. So he takes me down in the basement and he shows me he's got nothing like this, but he probably had like 12 or 15 bottles on hand, which in my mind, I'm like, that's a lot of whiskeys. And he's like, I'm going to take you on a tour around the world. We're going to have bourbons, rye, Scotch, Canadian. We're going to have, I think he even had like a Taiwanese whiskey called Cavalon. And we had all of these different things. And at the end of it, of course, even if you don't want to be, if you're trying like 7 or 8 different whiskeys, it's going to hit you. Even if you have like a sip of each one, it's going to hit you. And so I ended up giving the keys to Katie, my wife. And I was like, hey, you're going to drive home. And as we were driving home, she says to me, she's like, I think guys that drink whiskey are very sexy. And that was literally all the motivation I needed to start this vast empire that I have. For 8 years later, I hold on to that one compliment. So
nice. With, I guess when you're sampling whiskey, or I guess doing like a tasting of it. Mm-hmm. And this is a serious question.
Sure.
Is it, are you supposed to just savor it, or do you just throw it back?
So savoring is part of it. And this is actually a great question, because a lot of people kind of get this wrong. So when we go through college, we learn that you throw whiskey back, or you mix it in something and then you just drink it to get drunk. If you are drinking whiskey to taste it and enjoy it and do your whole thing, when I have whiskey tastings at my house, I try not to do more than 4 whiskeys, because at that point you're kind of blowing out your taste buds. But to answer your question a little bit more directly, what you should be doing is drinking a ton of water, potentially even proofing down your whiskey by adding water to it. And then you're going to be tasting things that are very subtle. So let's say I've got a couple of bottles here because I was kind of expecting a generic question, or not generic, I shouldn't say that because I'm totally happy to answer it. What's your favorite whiskey, right? So let me bring on just like a bourbon that I really love. So this is Old Forester 1920. So this one is actually very easy to get. It's only about $50, which is part of the reason I love this, because I will constantly have this one restocked on my bar. This is 115 proof, which is 57.5%. If I'm going to drink this one and I haven't had anything else that night, the very first sip, even for somebody like me, it's going to burn a little bit. For somebody who doesn't drink whiskey, it's going to be almost unpalatable. And the way that I would ask people to sample this one is take like the tiniest little sip and just get that burn out of the way. After that, let it linger in your mouth, even that little tiny sip. And I always tell people, breathe air over your tongue that has tasted the whiskey. And that's actually where you're going to be getting a lot of the flavors. Now, if I were to sample this whiskey right now, as somebody who does this constantly, I don't usually need that first thing, but sometimes I do. You never know. It depends on how long it's been since I've had a drink. If I'm going to taste this whiskey, I'm going to take a sip and I'm going to just leave it in my mouth for a sec. And it's going to be like kind of gross. I'm going to swirl it around my mouth, have it coat my cheeks, my tongue, my roof of my mouth, everything. And now I have that everywhere. I'm going to swallow it and I'm going to open my mouth and I'm going to breathe in through my mouth. And from there, I'm getting a lot of flavors. It's almost something between the oxygen and the flavors on your tongue that exist from the whiskey that you are now tasting it. I can keep going, but that's the general answer is that if you want to taste whiskey, there is a very specific procedure to do so. And you'll hear people say, like, drink whiskey however you want. And they're not wrong. But if you're drinking to pick apart a whiskey, there are very specific things that you can do that'll make you a lot more successful.
Okay. This will lead into my next question, but
sure.
Many years ago, I was in Edinburgh in Scotland, and I went to the Scotch whiskey experience. And when you're there and you're going on the tour, they will pour a tumbler for everybody of something from, what they've got there. And my coworker and I immediately, like almost reactionary, just threw it back. And that, I don't know what the proof was on it. I honestly don't remember what it was, but that hit me very fast. And my head started spinning immediately. And then our tour guide went ballistic on the both of us because we didn't do it right, according to him. We were supposed to savor that for the entire tour, not throw it back like a couple of Yanks, in his words. So I from that point forward, I'm like, apparently I've been drinking whiskey wrong this whole time.
If you're drinking whiskey that you don't necessarily want to taste, then throwing it back is the right call. It's like tequila. Like, you don't sip Jose Cuervo, you toss it back because
right.
So,
and I usually don't drink my whiskey straight up too. I'm always putting Coke in it. I'm always putting something in it because I'm also the type that will. I like to dilute it a bit. I always like when you hear people are like, "Oh, could you just put like a little bit of water in it?" Like, because I don't know. It's just how I am. I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording. We were talking about this where I'm a light drinker, and like if I would sooner walk around with like a glass with like food coloring and ice in it and tell people it's whiskey, like that's just how I am. And if I do have whiskey, I'm the type that would also be like, here, put some ice in this or a little bit of water. Cause I want to get like 75% of that buzz, not 100% of it.
Well, so something I always keep within reach here, especially when I'm doing my reviews on my channel and everything, this is just a water dropper. I always try to keep, actually, there's kind of gross water in there now. I need to change this out. Ugh, that's weird. I don't even want to look at that. But anyway, I usually will keep a water dropper around, and 3 drops is all you need. So if you're ever doing this at home, the thing that I was using, it's literally just like what you'd imagine for like medicine almost. And you squeeze the top and then you can drip out however much you want. 3 drops is enough. And there's actually a science behind it. What it does is the water interacts with these things called congeners, which is a kind of fatty acid. And it, what's the word? Coagulates, I guess you want to call it that, whatever. It gathers at the top of your whiskey. And this will bring a lot of the smells and the tastes right to the forefront. It's almost like if you go to a bar and they're trying to convince you that they made you a heavy drink, they might like put some vodka on the straw, just so that your first sip, you're like, oh, this is a strong drink. It brings all the flavors and everything right to the top. And it's a really good idea to add water to whiskey. In fact, if you ever see a whiskey tasting competition, they will absolutely be doing that because first off, nobody wants to get drunk because then you can't taste anything. Second, it's just a good practice. Ice, on the other hand, will typically dull the flavor. So if you're drinking something that you don't necessarily want to taste too much, or if you're just kind of getting used to it, throwing some ice in there is a really good call too.
Okay. So no ice, just a little bit of water.
Correct. That would be my personal preference. Is I like to always have the first sip from any new bottle that I get exactly what comes out of the bottle. Because in my mind, that's what the distiller had in mind. Afterwards, just especially on some of the things, there's a wonderful term. So if you have a whiskey that is over 70% ABV, it's called hazmat. And they call it that for 2 reasons. Number one, of course, because it's probably a marketing gimmick. But number 2 is you can't bring it on an airplane. It's too high ABV.
Really?
And so they are required to like put it on the bottle. So if anybody ever checks it out, they can see it. You also don't get that a whole heck of a lot. Whiskey, by definition, has to be under 80%, and most places don't go anywhere near that because it's not cost efficient. And it doesn't really taste that good if it's up that high. But proofing things down is very common practice.
Okay, interesting. Didn't know that. Hazmat, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds badass.
I only learned that a couple of years ago when a distillery sent me some samples and they're like, oh, by the way, Bill, there's this one in there. It's our hazmat. And I was like, yeah, of course it is. And I later looked it up. I was like, oh, that's a thing.
Oh, you're being serious.
Right.
Zach, go ahead.
So that is actually something I wanted to make sure I talked about. So how long did it take for you to actually get people and companies to actually just send you bottles? Because yes, people send bottles to Bill just to demo.
So good question. Let me think back on that a little bit. So when I first started the channel, I was actually only putting out a video every month because I did have a baby at home and it was a lot of work, and I also had no clue how to use Adobe products or whatever else. So the first year I got 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, which felt fantastic at the time. I remember actually, you might have even seen this to some degree, Zach, although I think you were in a different section of the office at the time. I remember watching it happen in my office, and then I ran around the office telling everybody that would listen that I had hit 1,000 subscribers. So after that, I started reaching out to places and asking them for bottles, especially craft distilleries, because most of them need the attention and I needed the bottles. I started realizing that this is a good move. They will spend, $30 to send me a bottle and I get free content. So I want to say probably about 1.5 years before I really got anything for free. But consistently about probably 3 years in. At this point, most of the bottles that are sitting over there and probably about half of these bottles were sent to me.
So now I have a specific question. So, because this whole time, there's one bottle that keeps jumping out to me because it's besides one other one, that's the only other colorful one. It's the one that's orange and green and red.
Yeah. So let me grab this. So this is from a distillery called Glenmorangie. And I would guarantee you that if you've ever seen whiskey at a bar, you've probably seen the Glenmorangie 10. It's a yellowish orangish bottle, and it's a pretty much a staple. It's actually very good. So if you're ever thinking about whiskey, it's a great starting Scotch. To potentially one to just always kind of keep on your shelf. I probably have one back there, but I haven't looked recently. This one right here is called A Tale of Cake, and Glenmorangie does a special release every year. And they've only been doing this for the last 3 years, actually. So it's fairly new. So this one was the first one. It's called A Tale of Cake. They did another one called A Tale of Winter, and then another one called, I think, A Tale of the Forest. This one is really cool because when I tasted this, I taste pineapple upside down cake, which
that's awesome,
right? And it's such a definitive flavor that I kind of doubted myself. And so as part of the episode, actually, you guys being somewhat familiar with video games to the degree that you are, I of course incorporated GLaDOS from Portal.
Hell yeah.
At the very beginning of the episode, and I had something about cake being a lie, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice.
So and then I proceeded to make an pineapple upside down cake as well to eat alongside this whiskey as part of the review, to say, like, are my tasting notes actually accurate? And, they were pretty darn close as far as drinking a whiskey and figuring out that it tastes like both pineapple and sweetness. And actually, this is something I want to talk about. So when you have somebody like myself say this whiskey tastes like pineapple upside down cake, it does not taste like pineapple upside down cake, which sounds very weird, right? What this tastes like is a combination of flavors that when you put them together can taste like that. So when I sip this, I taste pineapple, or more specifically, some sort of citrus that's light and fruity. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of like a pineapple. And then also there's like a cherry thing going on, and it's very sweet. And maybe there's like a heavy, like kind of a heavier body that reminds me of cake. And then when I'm writing a review, I think, how do those all combine? What has pineapple and cherry and cake and sweetness? Well, pineapple upside down cake. So let me try that. And that episode actually sticks out to me specifically because I tried to test my tasting profile to see if I was at all BSing myself as well as the audience. But luckily in that case, I wasn't.
Nice.
Nice,
Man. So on that,
how about you,
note,
Jack? Pick one.
Well, on that note, I'm actually curious about, we've heard about what the best whiskey is that you have, that being the Old Forester. What's the worst whiskey that you've tried?
Sure. So actually, just a slight correction, because I don't want to be mocked at all by your audience here. So, best whiskey on my shelf, I probably wouldn't say is the Old Forester. It's more just one that I really like, okay. And I don't mean to be pedantic about that. It's just I feel like it's important. But to answer your question, I frequently harp on the Johnnie Walker Red as being one of the worst whiskeys I have on my shelf. But if I'm being honest with myself, and I can be, because I've done a video on this, I put the 3 worst whiskeys that I think I have on my shelf up against each other, and I did pick one that was a loser. And I think the answer is going to surprise you guys. So I'll tell you which 3. So there was Johnnie Walker Red, which is a blended Scotch. There was Black Velvet, which is a Canadian Scotch, and I typically kind of crap on Canadian whiskeys altogether. I think I've had like 1 or 2 that were decent. And then the third one is Proper 12, which is an Irish whiskey that Conor McGregor actually had a hand in. Like, he's kind of the celebrity face to it. The actual whiskey itself is made by a company called Bushmills, which is extremely old. I think they're around, they started in 1608 is when they claim to actually have started, but most of their stuff wasn't made until the early 1700s. Anyway, so Conor McGregor put his name on this thing. He made this whiskey called Proper 12, which everything from the marketing to the taste was done poorly. When you put a 12 on the front of the bottle, what would you guys assume about that whiskey?
I would assume it'd be like, 12 different flavors that mixed together for a unique flavor experience or something like that.
How about you, Jack?
I would say, like, if we're on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of like how strong it is, or just, you also hear Conor McGregor, badass is a word that comes to mind. So 12 out of 10.
Okay. See, I find that really interesting because in my mind, I think, and it's mostly because I look at whiskey constantly, I would think it was 12 years old, which the number 12 is very prominent on the front. But I'm very intrigued to hear both of your answers, and it's given me something to think about as far as future episodes. So when you look at the Proper 12, you assume it might be about 12 years old. It actually has to do with a, what do you call it? Like an area of Dublin. And I think they call it the 12th, somewhere. It's like the 12th neighborhood. There's a name for it. And it's like intentionally deceitful if you look at it, as far as anybody who drinks whiskey would probably assume 12 years old. So It's awful. And it is a pretty terrible whiskey. Now, the Conor McGregor thing was cool for my channel because it actually got me a ton of views and a ton of subscribers.
Yeah, that's the
it
highest.
actually kind of launched my channel into the stratosphere.
That's the highest viewed video on your channel. It's got over 600,000 views.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's not great, but where that episode really did me a favor is that I was basically the only person on YouTube not just totally crapping on this whiskey. And I didn't say it was good. I think I finished the episode by saying, this might be okay if you mix it with ginger ale, which is enough of a hint that it's not very good to anybody who can, kind of think that one through. And I actually even got an email from the company saying that they enjoyed my review and they appreciated my honesty, et cetera, et cetera. And some of the other channels that did Conor McGregor's thing that just were like, this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Like, their channels came and went. And I think that not just, dumping on people is an important part of doing this.
Do you actively go through and read all the comments and feedback do you get? Or are you more like you try to avoid that because you don't want to know what people are saying?
I do, to my own chagrin, to a degree, or possibly my own destruction. I don't get a whole lot of negative comments. Actually, it's been an extremely good niche to be in as far as YouTube goes. The only real negativity I ever get is people tell me I look like what is it? I forget the guy's name, but he's the head of the Church of Satan there. He's got kind of the same mustache thing that I've shaved recently, but he has the same facial hair as me and he's bald. And and even that, like, who cares? Like, they're just like, oh, this guy looks like whatever Levine. And I'm like, okay, that's sure. Why not? But I never really get people being like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about or whatever. It's mostly they're like, I've tried that whiskey too. I see where you're coming from. I don't agree, but like, I get it. Like, that's the harshest comments I ever get. It's actually really nice.
Okay.
I found a safe haven in YouTube is whiskey.
Look, I think you look more like Matt Pinfield if you remember 120 Minutes on MTV.
I sure do.
Yeah, well, there you go. So back to distilleries. So we were talking about the Scotch whiskey experience in Edinburgh. What's your most favorite distillery that you've been to? I'm guessing you've been to a couple in your years.
I've been to less than you would assume, mostly because I live in Massachusetts and there's not a ton of them here. But there's a few that I'll call out. So there's one down in Texas which has a really interesting story. They are actually I think they might actually be the largest YouTube channel about whiskey. Even the niche, like they're kind of the top and they only have 500,000 subscribers. So the ceiling is very low for whiskey. But they're a channel called the Whiskey Tribe or the Whiskey Vault. And they started a distillery that they crowdfunded and they called it Crowded Barrel Distillery. And they have an awesome story as far as I'm concerned. There's these two guys, Rex and Daniel, and they worked together to kind of start up this distillery. They had a very successful YouTube channel. They knew what they were talking about. They're kind of like goofing on each other. In some ways, they actually remind me of O&A. So just kind of ripping on each other the whole time. And in a fun way, it's fun to watch. And I've been down to their distillery 3 or 4 times at this point. They have a yearly event down in Austin, Texas. And they invite several of the YouTubers out there to kind of hang out, and we sell our own merch or whatever. But for the most part, we get to meet our fans. And so it's a wild thing to walk around. Now, you guys are podcasters. So unfortunately, you don't have that video element so much where people might recognize you if you like go to the grocery store or something. But for me, going to that thing in Austin, Texas, I'm just walking, across the campus there, and people are like, Bill. And I'm like, well, I've been here a few years. I don't know if I know you or not. I have no idea if I recognize you. You're seeing me every week. I saw you last year, maybe. But it's a wild event, getting recognized in public. So
I'm always afraid that I'll get recognized in public because of this podcast, because it's going to be someone that wants to like deck me for something that I said, some terrible joke that I told in 2015.
So you're more of a notorious than
yeah. Let's go back to you having the water drops available.
Sure.
Now, someone that in the radio industry, we call them P1s. Gentleman named Kevin who listens to our podcast. He has one of his own called Alcohol by Volume, where he reviews different types of beer every week. Now, I think it's been a few years since he's actually produced an episode, but that's what the gist of the podcast is. And my favorite thing about his podcast is that rarely does he get through one without getting hammered. So do you find that you get inebriated easily when you're reviewing and talking about different whiskeys in your videos? And have you ever gotten like, I guess, absolutely annihilated for any of your videos or during any of your videos?
This is where the podcast turns into a much more fun situation. now it's me telling stories of times I've been drunk on camera. So at the very beginning of the channel, I've changed the format of my videos years ago for exactly this reason. So I've always been of the opinion, at least at the start, that I would film stuff in one take. And I would start at the beginning and I would just film all the way through. And it wasn't necessarily to make my job any easier. It was more, at the time that I started the channel, the only people doing jump cuts were like gaming channels. And I looked at it as very distracting and totally not the audience that I thought I was trying to get with the whiskey thing. I'm thinking that most of the people watching my channel are probably even older than me. And they're not going to want to be like, oh my God, flashing lights and it's jump cuts. So I was like, it's important for me to just sit here and talk at somebody and explain what I want to say and then be good with it. But there's an inherent problem with that. If you start off the episode, hey, welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary, blah, blah, blah. This is, I don't know, Old Forester 1920. Let me go ahead and take a sip and I'll tell you all about it. And I take a sip and I talk for another minute and suddenly I flub a line so bad that I need to start over. Now I've got to start over, and now I'm going to take another sip, and then I'm probably going to make another mistake. And 3 or 4 times, either I'm going to record a sloppy episode, or I'm going to have to do it again tomorrow. So, and that became a problem on actually very early on. There was I did 3 episodes. I filmed them back to back, and it was the Bulleit Bourbon, the Bulleit Rye, and then the Bulleit 10-year bourbon. And I remember by the time I did the Bulleit 10-year bourbon, I distinctly remember this episode. I was like, so this is like the Bulleit 10-year. It's pretty, it's okay. You know, like I just like flopping all over my words. And I'm just like way too casual, way more than I wanted to be. And I remember putting out that episode and just like a week later, I rewatched it. I was just like, that was not great. And then, I ended up, I ended up just completely changing my format, and I changed it so I do the drinking towards probably like the 3/4 of the way through. And actually that's kind of the theme of my channel is I start off with the history of the brand, and then I talk about the whiskey specifically. So I'll be like, oh, the mash bill of this, which is basically the recipe of the whiskey, is this. And then let's move on to the nosing and the tasting. And then at the end, I give my overall opinion on the whiskey, whether you should buy it or not. But let's go back to your fun question. So when have I been hammered? And the answer to that is live streams. I have learned that live streams for me should end at an hour, because if they don't, that's when everything starts hitting me. Now, I do this theme on my live streams that I call the Wheel of Doom. And I have this box behind me. It's probably got about 50 different samples in it. And these are samples that viewers have sent in or people have given me that I know in person, whatever, or even companies. And I'll put them all on a Lazy Susan. That's like a automatic Lazy Susan. And I'll just blindly reach over and grab one and I'll try it. And I don't do it blind. I look at what it is and I'm just like, okay, so this is the Lagavulin something or other. And let me pour this and I'll taste it and I'll talk about it and I'll say what I think about it, et cetera, et cetera. But when I do that for an hour, usually I'm going through 6 or 7 different whiskeys, and most of these are full pours. And I can power through that for an hour. But if you go an hour and 15, you're going to start seeing a different bill. Which has definitely happened.
And then things start to loosen up, and then you wish you stopped in an hour.
Exactly. There was one time I was in, so I used to travel for work a lot, and I would go to California basically every other month. And a lot of times I would bring my camera equipment because I'm like, hey, I'm in a hotel room. Why don't I just film and get some of these episodes out of the way and whatever. So sometimes I would live stream from the hotel, and if the signal was good enough, I would do it for a while. And I remember doing a live stream using my phone from a hot tub one time at the hotel. It was late. There was nobody around, and I was just doing that. And I hopped on somebody else's stream. I was like, "Hey, everybody, I'm in California. I'm drinking." It's fun. And I distinctly remember later on in that person's show, I had gotten off of the stream, and then I went back to my room to take a shower, and I was like, you know what? I bet it'd be funny to stream while I'm in the shower. Just position it properly. And I had it was like, chest height up, and I was just like, this will be funny. And so I rejoined his stream, and I was just like, hey, everybody, I'm in the shower. Oh man, I was having a good time that night. I had bottles I used to keep out in San Diego in my desk at the office, and it just that was fun times.
This story is the exact reason why I no longer drink while recording episodes of this podcast. I shouldn't say no longer. Every once in a while, I like to enjoy a snifter of port at Christmas, but that's the most you'll get out of it.
Boy, I figured I'd be the one sounding stuck up on this podcast. Yes, I drink a snifter of port at Christmas during the holidays.
Zach, let me throw it over to you.
Yes, so I guess I was thinking the right way to word this question. What would you say is the most expensive whiskey that you have that's worth it, and the most expensive whiskey you have that's like,
I can answer the second part of that question without even thinking about it. So let me start at the second half. So I have these 2 bottles of whiskey. Unfortunately, they're not within arm's reach. Otherwise, I'd show them off. But both of them were $100, which is not terrible as far as whiskey goes at all. Although, don't be mistaken, you can get a lot of really good stuff under $100. So in this case, one of them is Chinese, and I bought it because it was a Chinese whiskey. I've never had one before. I was like, great, brand new region. Let me try this out. And it's called Go Along. And it's a 5-year-old aged whiskey that's aged in ex-bourbon barrels, which is very typical across the world. Most people use ex-bourbon barrels because Jack Daniels and Heaven Hill make a absolute metric ton of whiskey. Actually, literally way more than a metric ton of whiskey. But anyway, so they have a ton of barrels to be used. Now, this Go Along whiskey, they claim it's Chinese, which means that it should at least be made in part in China. It's not. It's aged in China, maybe. I believe some of it's shipped over from Scotland. No, I'm sorry. It's shipped up from Australia, and then it is put in ex-bourbon barrels, and then it's stuck in a building somewhere in China for 5 years. And then they make it sound as if it's Chinese whiskey. It's absolutely god-awful. It's 40%, which is the minimum that you need to be for whiskey. And it tastes just super bland, super boring, very watery. And I'm mostly disheartened because I spent $100 on it. Now, the other one, and actually, you know what? I am going to take 2 seconds to just walk away and get this because the visual here is worth it. So give me just a second.
Oh, okay, great. I love when the bottle, I love when bottles actually look different or unique.
Yeah,
and, those are the I don't know. Those always catch my eye.
Yeah, I'm definitely a judge a book by their cover sort of drinker, and if it's not a sick looking bottle shape or color, it's got if it has a name. Like I remember I tried I tried some in Vegas 10 years ago that had butthole in the name of it, and I'm like, now I want that. I don't care what it tastes like. In fact, I should probably be concerned about what it tastes like with a name like butthole, but I want that. And it was a perfectly cromulent beer.
Cromulent, good use. I like that.
Okay,
another Simpsons reference. I had to think about that for a second. All right, so this is the H. Derringer. Now, this is a bourbon. The cork has broken, so that's worth checking out. The this little twine that's around it too. I apologize for the podcast listeners. I'll do my best to describe this. So there is a gold rope that is around the neck of the bottle. The decanter itself is actually pretty cool. But what makes this whiskey awesome, as far as visually, is it comes with a fake little gun.
Sick.
It's named after the Derringer pistol, right? So it's like this little tiny thing. It used to have the cork in it, and that's what broke off here. So after you open it, you can stick the gun into the bottle as if it's the cork. I don't hate this one because it's pretty cool to look at until the cork broke, which is it's a sign of a very poor quality construction. But anyway, so that answers probably the most expensive ones that I regret buying. But the one that I had there, I don't have it anymore because of course I finished it because it was amazing. But this also leads into a pretty funny story similar to what you were talking about, Jack, with your distillery there. So I had this one. It was the Old Pulteney 1983, and I got this on my 35th birthday from a viewer who actually sent it in, and it was a $600 bottle of whiskey. And I remember I mentioned randomly on one of my episodes, I was like, hey guys, I'm going to be turning 35. So like, if you have any suggestions for a 35-year-old whiskey that's not crazy expensive, let me know in the comments, et cetera, et cetera. And this one guy, he emails me. He's like, hey, did you buy anything for yourself yet? And I said, no. And he's like, let me take care of it. And I was like, okay. So I had no idea what he was going to send me. But next thing I know, I'm getting a package delivered in the mail of this $600 bottle of Scotch that is sherry finished, which means it's going to taste a little fruity, but also just with the age that it had, which 35 years, like really everything about it was beautiful. That one was worth every penny. And to your story earlier, Jack. So I was having Thanksgiving at my house, and I always make a big deal to have a huge Thanksgiving. I invite like everybody I can, dozens of people. And one of my wife's cousins came over, and she was maybe 22 at the time. And I had a few people over in a corner. I was like, hey guys, I've got this really expensive whiskey. I can't wait to show it to you. Like, do you want to try it? And I gathered a group and I poured a small amount in each one. And, one person takes a little sip. It's like, oh my gosh, that's really good. Another person, I don't get it. It's a little burny, whatever. She like takes the thing and just shoots it back. And then so does her boyfriend, who's right next to her. He kind of just follows suit. So the two of them just right back. And I just looked at them like, you guys are not welcome to drink at my house anymore. Like, what are you doing? So I try to be patient, but I kind of feel your tour guide there, Jack.
No, I like the bottle that you just showed too, because it looks very it looks
Derringer, yeah,
it looks medieval.
It does. It's got like this gold plate on the front as well. Yeah, it's a pretty cool bottle. Like nothing about the bottle is bad. A 10 out of 10 bottle.
Nice,
except for all the breakages.
What's a few cracks? Zach, anything else?
Just that I think that we should definitely do a Patreon episode at one point where we're just like, every 10, 15 minutes, we just get progressively a little bit more drunk and just see what happens. Because it could, if it's not great, we can always just cut it up and just the rest of this episode is redacted. But that's just
wow, Zach, boy, that just sounds like an awful idea. Remember, people spend money on this.
Zach, you and I can do that together. We'll leave Jack out.
No, see, I want to join you because then I can force myself to actually try to savor some whiskey rather than throwing it back like a hick.
Yeah, I could send you guys some cool stuff.